Okay, so Hare Krishna, dear ladies. Welcome to the January Urban Devi Sangha and Women's Discussion Group. A special welcome to those of us who may be joining us for the first time. If you are joining for the first time, please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello. My name is Damodar Priya Devi Dasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Walker and Surabhi Govinda Devi Dasi. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. Today, we are very blessed to have Rasa-sthali Devi Dasi, and a little bit about her for those of you who don't know her. Rasa-sthali joined the temple in 1991 and lived full-time there until 2000. And while there, her primary service was book distribution. She then returned to her hometown and first temple, which is ISKCON Durban, Sri Sri Radhanath Temple, the largest ISKCON center in Africa, where she serves as brand and social media manager. Rasa-sthali is also an editor and was one of the early readers of the book Prema Kirtan by Pranada Kamtoy. And she's also one of 5 members on the ISKCON Durban management. Rasa-sthali is a champion for women in Bhakti Jai as part of the Women's Collective South Africa, an initiative that focuses on creating a happy and safe service atmosphere for Vaishnavis. And she's also the managing director of Bhakti Theatre. And this Vaishnava Theatre initiative has won a spot, which is 1 in 10, at the Community Arts Festival at the Durban Playhouse, which is supported by the Department of Sports and Architecture. Now, a little bit about today's topic. Rasa-sthali will be speaking on Who Am I? The Devastation of Discrimination. She will be sharing her own story of being raised in an apartheid country and how identification of the self as the body is the seed of discrimination. And together with her, we will be exploring and unpacking our conscious and unconscious biases. So thank you again, Rasa-sthali, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Hare Krishna, devotees. Can everybody hear me nicely? You can just thumbs up if you can. Such an honor to be with all of you today, and I just want to say that I'm not really a public speaker, so I'm a little afraid in very straightforwardly, but I'm also just so happy to be here to talk to all of you about a topic that I feel quite strongly about. And I want to start by telling you the story of a 9 or 10-year-old girl. So this girl, she's an Indian girl, and she went with her parents, this is me, went with my parents shopping at a big shopping area. And while they were shopping, I got really hungry. So they sent me over to the little restaurant there to get something for myself. In those days, things were safe enough that we could do that kind of thing. And I bought my little meal and I sat down and I began eating. And then across from me were an elderly white couple, white-skinned, Caucasian, I think in America, that's what you call them. But a white couple, and the husband turned to the wife and said, "Are they allowed to be here?" And I looked at him and she looked at her husband and said, "Yes, dear, this is prospecting." And they both got up and left. And I remember my 9 or 10-year-old self having a rise of anger and a sense of injustice come up into my heart. And I mean, 40 years later, I still remember it. I remember the faces, I remember the feeling. So it was quite a marker in my life. So growing up in apartheid, so for those of you that may not know what apartheid is basically a formal law that segregates people based on their skin color. It is a very gross discrimination. So people there were 4 races. There were 4 races in South Africa. It was white, colored, which is mixed race. It's called colored in South Africa, Indian, and then black. And in that hierarchy, there were different opportunities and no opportunities. So there were areas we were allowed to go to, there were areas we were allowed to live in, and various things like that. So apartheid dissolved in the early 90s. So when I was in high school, we had a lot of political discussion. And rightfully so, there was a lot of anger amongst the youth. People were feeling like we need to fight for freedom. And my parents were business owners. So they, and at my parents' business, there would be people coming to us saying, when the country is free, we will come and claim your business and you will have no place to go. So there was a sense of, there was also like an idea of fear being circulated in the communities. So it was like a very interesting setting. And in my young mind, when I experienced this, I thought, okay, so we may change the law, but how is this going to change people's thinking? It's not going to change people from discriminating against. It's not going to transform suddenly because the law allows it. Doesn't mean that now, we're all going to get together and hold hands. That's not going to happen. And how does that happen? And at that very time, I came across Hare Krishna devotees. And they were speaking about how we're not the body. And at that time, a lot of devotees were of different colors in the country, and they were mingling with each other, living together, which was very illegal and worthy to become arrested and charged. So it was quite a risk they were taking. But when I read Srila Prabhupada's Science of Self-Realization, I thought, oh, so we may change laws, but we're not changing hearts. And for me, the process of bhakti is what actually changes hearts. Because the truth is, in life, people have many righteous causes, and many people do wonderful things in the world in the fight for equality. But they're all limited to who we are and how we perceive the world and what good we want to do in society. It doesn't necessarily free you from your identification. Whereas bhakti truly frees you. That's what I experienced with devotional service. And one of the reasons I chose to speak about this is today there are so many wars across the world. There are genocides, and all of these things are based on discrimination. If you're this religion, if you're that color, if you have that vernacular. So it's a very real thing that comes up, and it's very much in our face. Maybe it's not happening in our country, that we're not necessarily so aware of it, but it is a real thing. And spiritual knowledge, what is the base, what is the starting point of spiritual knowledge? To understand, maybe you can say in the chat, what is the starting point of spiritual knowledge? I'd appreciate to hear what devotees have to say. We're not these bodies, Damodar Priya, thank you. Anybody else? What is the starting point of spiritual knowledge? So yes, we're not the body.
You can also unmute yourself if you are having trouble. Oh, Surabi Govinda also wrote, dissatisfied with the current situation?
Yeah. That's normally a reason we embark on a spiritual journey. We're all sparks of Krishna. Yes. I just want to acknowledge Pranada Prabhu, who joined. Pranada Prabhu, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Very embarrassing. So the beginning of spiritual life is to know thyself. Know thyself. And who is thyself? we hear the beginning is that we're not the body. We are all sparks of Krishna. And we know thyself. Who are we? Okay, sorry, I'm just reading the chat while we are talking, so just bear with me. And that basis of knowing who we are is what frees us from the conceptions of, oh, she is a Iranian woman, or whatever the discrimination may be. So knowing who we are is the first point to freedom, because in this world we are born and we are given so many ideas to buy into. We are told we are meant to be a certain way, we are meant to look a certain way, we're meant to behave a certain way. A constructed society. We are told these things. Yes, thank you, Deepa. Who is God? So there are two sides to it. So who are we? And what is who is God, and what is our relationship with God? And that Sanskrit term is called Sambandhana Gyan. So Sambandhana Gyan means to understand this. And this understanding is, as we progress in spiritual life, it is more and more uncovered. Because knowing that we're not the body does not necessarily mean we act in that way all the time. We have moments, we have glimmers of times where we are lucid in understanding that we're not the body, but it's not necessarily a constant. We're normally responding to it because this vehicle we have, blessed be, is what we're living in. It's what we're using all the time. It's how we function in the world. So to completely say, oh, I'm not this body, is not an easy thing. And that is one of the reasons why Srila Prabhupada so often in his books go back to we're not the body, because we need to be reminded. And understanding that we're not the body is not a small feat. It's something that we have to work on at every moment, at every choice. And an example is how we respond to situations. If somebody comes up to us and says, you're ugly. You're ugly. So how we respond to that is how much or how little we identify with our bodies and knowing who that belongs to. Am I right? So the idea of discrimination comes from the misidentification with the body. As long as I think that I am an Indian woman from South Africa, I will discriminate. So Damodar Priya is saying, what a great exercise. What would I do if someone said to me, you are ugly? Yeah, give that some thought. You can put it in the comments. What would you do? How would you, now, what would you do also means how you would think and how you would feel. Because the truth is that, our emotions, emotions are urgent. They are our immediate responders. So it would be interesting to know how we would respond to that. But the point is that we identify with our bodies, and therefore we respond with our bodies. We either respond emotionally, physically, or mentally. Now, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that a humble sage sees with equal vision the cow, the brahmana, the elephant, the dog, and the dog eater. So let's look at that for a bit, and how the sage sees equality. And why does he see equality? Can somebody tell me in the chat why? Oh, you can speak out, it's fine. We're a nice little group here. Why is it that they see it equally? What is the reasoning?
Because they see the soul.
Yes. Yes. they recognize that they are all living sparks and that the Lord is situated in all their hearts. And that's a really big thing. How often is it that we walk around and we see other, let alone humans, but animals and other species as sparks of Krishna? That is an extraordinary thing. And it makes me want to share the story of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when he was touring South India, he went to a place called, he walked through a place called Jarikanda Forest. And in Jarikanda Forest, he sang a very beautiful verse. And in that, when he sang that verse, all the animals, the predators and the herbivores and all the animals got attracted to him. And a miraculous thing happened. In that chanting, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's chanting, they leapt up and they started chanting and dancing, chanting in their language. That is what I have understood it to be, chanting in their language. And then, can you imagine tigers and deer coming together and licking each other? So in the spiritual practice, there is a transcendence that comes with the body. There's a transcendence that comes with the body. And that is something that we have to work on day to day, moment to moment. Since we are all here, we are all spiritual practitioners to some degree or the other. But this practice of understanding that we're not the body is not only for us to repeat we're not the body, but really understand, what does that mean emotionally? What does it mean internally? What does it mean in terms of my behavior? Do I walk out and I judge how people dress? Do I judge how people talk? Do I judge how people respond to situations? And all of those things are reminders that we're not necessarily identified, but we're not understanding we're not the body. So we are, this glorious world is structured in such a way that we can constantly look at ourselves. How are we practicing that we're not the body? Because that basic understanding, if we really understand that we are sparks of Krishna, then our priorities change. Our priorities does not become focused on solely taking care of the body. Of course, we have to take care of the body. The body is our vehicle, and we honor it. We eat healthy, we exercise, we nourish it, we clean it. So all of those things are there, but we see it as a tool to help us connect deeper to who we really are. So I want you all to think about the last time you went out and looked at somebody with judgment. And this might take a little bit of practice, because there are two things. There's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias. So conscious bias are things that are very obvious to us. For example, things like racial discrimination. Those are big ones, they're obvious ones, they're easy to see. But what about the unconscious bias that we don't realize actually these things are holding us back? So I just want to say that I may be using terms that are used in secular society, but these are all tied into reminding us of Srila Prabhupada's primary point that we're not the body. So to recognize an unconscious bias means that we are recognizing a part of us that we identify as this body and our experience on this planet. And that's why it's so important to focus on that, to be conscious of it. It's I would call it a moment to moment thought process, a moment to moment. Like, think about the time we're women, we know this only too well, when we look at ourselves in the mirror. the amount of self-rejection we have. Think about when we think, oh, I wish this, and whatever it may be, but the amount of self-rejection there is there. Because why? We think that we are this, but we're so much more. This is our blessed vehicle, but we're so much more. I'm going to just read Damodar Priya's comment because it's such a beautiful comment. She says, yes, we are trained to criticize our appearance so much as those who are in female bodies. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why something that always struck me is that why does Srila Prabhupada practically on every opportunity he has, he talks about us not being the body? Why? Why does he do this? Because when we identify with being the body, we actually hold ourselves back. We hold ourselves back to becoming those sparks, that pure connection, awakening that pure connection to Krishna. Because those identifications are all false. They cloud us. So to peel away this understanding that we're not this body is so fundamental in our spiritual practice. Think, okay, so where I am, it's already evening time, but think about it from this morning to now, how many times we misunderstood or focused on being the body and how it's just actually blocked us. Think about the times that identifying with the body blocked us from true spiritual knowledge. Think about when our egos hold us back. So what is the ego? The ego is false identification. How would you describe the ego? You can share it on the chat. I'd love to hear from you. People are kind of shy today compared to the other sessions that I've been to. So please share. But what is it? What is false ego? When we think ourselves, oh, that's mine. False ego is thinking that we are the doer. Okay, yes. Thank you, Damodar Priya. Saving the day all the time. Yeah, so basically, the false ego is something that self-centered. Yes, the symptom of the false ego is that we become self-centered, for sure. But the false ego is a misidentification of a situation. So by its very nature, it does not allow you to see with clarity. And that's something really to think about. As long as we carry our false ego, there's something false in our understanding. And that's why we have to keep going back to understanding we're not the body. And I think it's a worthy practice to spend a few moments every day thinking, when did I, act on ego? When did I rise above it? It's very important to count the times that you respond with ego, and especially count the times when you rise above it, because those victories are what pushes us forward. And when you think of those two situations, how, when you actually rise above the ego, how much more successful is that situation turns out to. Am I right? You can show me a thumbs up if you've had that kind of experience, or a heart, where you actually rise above your ego and just things are just so much better. Even when you're wronged. I don't know if any of you have had that experience when you've been wronged and you're in the right, but you don't act because you're being right. And somehow or the other, you don't allow your ego to feed into itself that, but I'm right here. And you allow for grace rather to move through you, and give up the need of wanting to be right, or wanting to state how you are right, or establish how you are right. And how that when you allow the grace to go through you, something changes in the heart. And you realize, oh, because the ego is a very subtle thing. It tells you, it feeds to you very positive things and negative things, but it's still tied to the body. And that's what's so extraordinary about bhakti. Bhakti unties you from the body. It unties you from your experience in this world. It makes you understand that there is something greater, there is something beyond. And that is a true treasure, in my opinion. I do want to say that when devotees are functioning in society, we need to function in a holistic way. And there are few things that we do. We function in greater society. We function in our devotional community, like with fellow devotees or like-minded people, and then ourselves. So this bodily identification is on those levels as well. And we have to, I think that if we pay attention to the individual bodily identification, and when I say bodily identification, I'm not talking about our gross body. I'm talking about our thoughts, the little criticisms that we put out to things that we see in the world, things that we see in ourselves. Those things we need to pay attention to, because that becomes the foundation for how we function in our community and how we function in society. And bhakti practitioners have various qualities. And one of the qualities is compassion and tolerance. And when we work on understanding that we're not the body and we're spiritual by nature, and when we pay attention to how we deal with each other, we develop tolerance and compassion, and we become open-hearted and open-minded. And then we find that we can actually have heart connections with people because we break through the defense barrier that we have. Am I right? Have you experienced that? Have you done that? So I can't hear anybody, so I'm hoping that you are resonating with what I'm saying. But that idea, the idea of not being the body, feeds into compassion. It feeds into tolerance. It feeds into being open-minded. And therefore, we move through the world non-judgmentally. And it makes me think of Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada and how he moved through the world, and how non-judgmental and how absolutely accepting he was. And we have to look at our previous teachers, our previous masters, to understand what that brings to us. So Srila Prabhupada himself, you know, when he originally went to America, he even said it. He put his food next to cat food in the fridge. You know, how many of us would do that today? It's not something that we would necessarily tolerate, but he did it. He did it because he understood. And isn't that a beautiful thing? So can you imagine that we go into space and there is no judgment, there's no expectation, because we're looking at beyond our limitations. And that's what that misidentification with the body makes you feel like you need to be a certain way, you need to speak in a certain way. It creates all these parameters. So it starts to close in on us. But when we start to understand we're not the body and we're spiritual by nature, our compassion opens. And when that compassion opens, we become ready to allow grace to move through us. And it allows us to connect with each other in a heart way, the way Srila Prabhupada connected with us. It was not easy for Srila Prabhupada. It was not, you know, he lived with somebody who was crazy, who could actually hurt him. And, you know, when he came to the West, he was not actually prepared. In his mind, he didn't think he was going to initiate women. He did not think in his mind originally that he's going to need to create an ashram for women. But he saw the situation. And that's the thing. When we understand that we're not the body, you become pliable to the will of the Lord. You become pliable to the situation. And you're able to apply spiritual principles in a very practical way. And that's the beauty of understanding who we truly are. And that devastation of discrimination disappears. When Srila Prabhupada came to South Africa in 1974, he made one trip to South Africa, and he spent 19 days here. And the devotees, so at that time, the devotees came from the US and the UK. But it was very hard for American devotees to be here because of the sanctions and various things. But because South Africa was a colony, we had a much better relationship with the UK. And therefore, it was easier for the UK devotees to be here. But even when they came, they were told not to speak to people of other races. So that was a challenge. And then Srila Prabhupada coming into the country was not an easy feat because he was Indian. And if he was Indian, he would have to stay in an Indian area. And then we had all these white-bodied devotees here. So it was such a balance. So it was such a balance that we had that when Srila Prabhupada came, the devotees always had to be very careful. They had to hide. When Prabhupada came, they had to live in an Indian area because he was, he had a visa and it had to come through some Indian gentleman. So he lived in an Indian area, and the devotees had to hide him in Durban. And then when he went to Johannesburg, which is the capital, well, not the capital, but next to the capital city, and it's about 6 hours away from a coastal city, Durban, and he stayed in the only center we had in the country was in a Jewish center, but because all the devotees were white, they could get away with it. And there was one Indian girl who was a full-time devotee, and they used to tell people that she was the maid, so the helper. That's how she got to stay with all the devotees. And Srila Prabhupada stayed there, and they had to hide him when he was there. But Prabhupada did it. And he met, well, now we have understood him to be part of what historically would be known as the Boer Bond, which were the secret police, because they were watching. Anything against apartheid was very closely watched. And the devotees were actually hunted by the police often. My spiritual master is from the UK, and he spent many years here, and he was chased by the police many a times. So when Srila Prabhupada came, he met professors in UDW, in one of the universities, Indian universities here, and he spoke to them, and he did not compromise. But they were very polite to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada didn't allow it to deter him from his mission of sharing Krishna consciousness. And in the same way, when we understand we're not the body, then we will do things, extraordinary things, where ordinarily we won't want to put ourselves in that position, but Prabhupada put himself in that position because he understood that we're not the body, and his message was so important. And so many devotees came from reading his books because of the political strife. I'm not unique to that. Many devotees my age, older than me, came because of that. So I'd actually like to stop here. And should we have questions now, Damodar Priya, or should we have breakout rooms?
So I believe that it would be best if we did breakout rooms, and then we'll have questions and reflections afterwards, just so that everybody has a time to be in a more intimate atmosphere. As you said, folks are feeling a little shy, but I just want to read the reflection question aloud for those who will be watching this on YouTube later on, so that they can hear what we're going to be talking about, and they can also perhaps participate, pause the recording for themselves. So the reflection questions, dear lady, is please share an example of when you experienced discrimination in your life and when you were the one who discriminated another. Then share how you think our Bhakti devotional principles can help us handle these kinds of circumstances, and in particular to those personal examples that you shared in the group. So I'm going to pause the recording so we can get ready. Okay, so welcome back everyone for our Q&A and reflection section. So we have the floor open if anybody wants to either raise their virtual hand or wants to share a reflection or a question for Rasa-sthali, our speaker today. And if not, Rasa-sthali, do you have something that came up for you during the breakout groups that you would like to share? You just have to unmute yourself.
I'd like to hear from everybody first, if that's okay.
Of course, of course. So does anybody have either, yep, it looks like Deepa has her hand up. Please go ahead, Deepa.
Hare Krishna. Yes, it was what you just said about at the end of it, we usually are struggling to get everything and there's not enough time. But this time is the first time we were sort of really quiet at the end. And I thought that was really interesting. We all shared very nicely. And then there was this quiet, and it was just very, very heartwarming, actually. And I thought, well, for me, it was like, I'm glad I've got this out of the way, because for me, it was the discrimination when I first came to this country, and how I was called a Paki, and Paki go home, and you smell of curry and all that. So, and I wasn't here with my parents, so I think that made it even harder for me. But I haven't thought about all this for a long time, and that's why I'm feeling that it's in my consciousness, and I'm glad I've got it out of the way now. And, you know, thank everyone for listening to this when I was doing this. And
Thank you,
we had a few, yeah, it was really interesting if they want to share it. Their own, because I'm not sure, you know, what is allowed.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for honoring that. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. And I'm so glad that you were able to find the safe space to talk about these things in a Bhakti perspective to help you heal. But it looks like we have Andrea who has her hand up. Andrea, would you like to share?
Well, thank you. So yeah, it was really nice in our time, because there was that quiet pause at the end, and it felt like, one, I just want to say thank you to the women who did share and just had that vulnerability. And at the end, there was this beautiful quiet that Deepa was speaking of. And it was almost like the space just to be and to exist and allow that. Because I mean, like those tender, like it was like this, the silence was a tender space for tender moments just to be held. And yeah, it just felt very nice.
Yeah, and hopefully I didn't throw all of you off too much when I came in abruptly thinking that you needed help. I saw a raised hand and I was like, what's going on? Good. Thank you so much for sharing that, Andrea. And yes, I wrote that down because that was so sweet. The understanding that quiet can be a space to be and to allow yourself a tender space of being held within the other Vaishnavis. So thank you so much for sharing that, Andrea. Does anybody else have anything from either group that would like to share? Or questions as well? If anybody has any questions, anything from Rasa-sthali's presentation that you wanted further clarification, I know that I had a question if nobody else has one, because I wasn't able to be in a breakout group, so I don't have any reflections. But I was wondering, Rasa-sthali Devi Dasi Prabhu, if once you met the devotees, how did your personal kind of perspective in terms of how other people viewed you as being Indian bodied change versus before you met the Hare Krishna devotees? So I'm just wondering if that's something you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. So, I mean, I recognize that I'm Indian bodied, but I recognize that it didn't matter. It did not mean that I was inferior. That's the thing. Apartheid teaches you if you're anything but white, you're inferior. But with the devotees, no, you're a spirit soul and you are fully capable of loving God, just like all of us, and your purpose is to serve Him. So that was the experience.
And in terms of how you related to people who weren't devotees, did that change at all in terms of facing discrimination?
Well, I had joined the temple as a full-time devotee, and I did mostly book distribution. So I spent a large part of my time when I lived in the ashram distributing books and telling people about the books. So it was very important for me because I felt that that's what erases the hatred. That's what erases the hurt and the pain, by truly understanding or this concept that you're not the body, you're something more than that. So yeah.
Thank you, Rasa-sthali. Does anybody else have any questions or reflections?
I've
I
just
think Deepa-
got, sorry, I've just got a comment actually. Being in Sanatan Dharma, and it was only when I read Prabhupada, I realized that the body concept. So although I had a lot of what Prabhupada had, it was very difficult to in Sanatan Dharma to actually see this part of me, that I'm not this body. And I'm finding this really difficult. And today I found the subject, I realize how difficult this subject is for me. So I'm really grateful that I'm getting to hear all this.
Deepa, may I ask, what are you finding difficult?
Well,
What exactly
it's just that I've never really thought, well, I have, I suppose, but it's not as a young person thinking, oh, you know, Sanatan Dharma is saying to me, I'm not this body. It was saying a lot of other things, who's Krishna and all that, but not so much that I am this body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
I can totally relate, Deepa. You know, it's not an easy thing to really, what do you call it? What is the word I'm looking for? To assimilate the concept of I'm not the body, because clearly we move in a body, right? So to, you know, and as we grow up, you know, we are all female here, you know, not that it doesn't happen to men, you know, I can speak for them, the way they feel as they grow up in their body, right? Because that's their lot right now. But, you know, I'm in my late 60s and I look at myself every day and I'm like, okay, you know, I look more and more like my mom and I see things changing, and it is really difficult. Sorry, my dog interrupted. It's really difficult not to stay focused on that and to keep that idea of I'm not the body, you know, go back to that mantra, if you will. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm something divine, I'm going to be elevated, and you know, this is just a vehicle that is carrying me through this time. So I completely understand. It's not an easy thing even for me either. I'm going to tune out because he's barking too much.
I feel like Martine's dog was also trying to say, like, I'm not this body. I'm a spirit soul. I may be in a dog body, but hear me. And I feel like he he was feeling inspired from Rasa-sthali's story of Lord Chaitanya, you know, getting all the animals to start chanting in their language. He's like, I can chant too. So that's lovely. Thank you so much, Martine. And I just wanted to read a comment from Julia Barrier, who wrote in the chat. She said, I love that Rasa-sthali mentioned that it's not just we are not this body. We are so much more than that. We are spirit soul, a servant of Krishna. So thank you so much, Julia, for sharing that.
So these stories of the animal devotees really helps me connect to that concept of not being the body. The animal's a devotee. It's not a bunny or a dog or a rabbit. It's just another devotee.
Yes, thank you, Angel. I also always really find inspiring the stories of either Krishna or Lord Chaitanya or the devotees kind of interacting with spirit souls and animal bodies and just kind of giving ourselves that reminder of that. That's why I smiled and I was grinning from ear to ear, Rasa-sthali, when you were going to tell that story. I thought you were going to tell it because that's one of my favorite stories to do with the kids. I feel like the children really, really get enthused, and since a lot of us want to have like that childlike enthusiasm for the holy names, like they really love it when I'm telling the stories and I'm just like, and then the animals started saying Hare Krishna, Krishna, and they just start getting up and I'm like, come on, let's dance like the animals. And they are so excited with the idea that even souls in animal bodies can be enthused about the holy names, and it's totally logical to them. They don't have even a moment's hesitation about it. So thank you again for bringing up that story. It always brings a smile to my face.
Oh, you're welcome.
Does anybody else have any reflections or questions, anything else that they'd like to share? Thank you so much, Angel, for sharing that. Really appreciate hearing from you. So I see Angel's still unmuted. Did you want to share anything else, Angel?
I did, but I saw some other people that I think
No, it's okay. Please go ahead. Okay, what did you want to share?
Along these stories that are sweet to hear, thank you for sharing the story about how Prabhupada was hidden. I really appreciate hearing all the mischievous things that this gentleman did. My daughter takes a Bhakti class online, and they talk about the class is talking about the various things Prabhupada did, and the woman went, "What do you want to learn?" And my daughter goes, "I want to learn how Prabhupada went to San Francisco and played kirtan at a concert." Right? This is right up there. Prabhupada hiding in South Africa. Like I can. It's juicy. It's just so I could taste it. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
And anybody else? Martine or Deepa?
Oh, Deepa can go yeah, go ahead, Deepa. You're muted.
Sorry, Deepa, you just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, good. When it comes to judgment, we respond negatively in a particular way because we are defensive. Could you say a bit more about that? I don't know
You
if
want
I've asked.
me to comment?
Yes, please.
The reason we become defensive is because we feel like we're under attack first and foremost. And, it's kind of a human sort of response.
Mm.
But it makes me think of, I don't know if everybody knows the story of Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he had taken the role to be Arjuna's chariot driver. And the day he started, the day they decided to attack Bhishma, who was Arjuna's grandfather, it was a really fierce situation. And when Bhishma decided to really attack with all his might, and his arrows pierced Krishna's skin, And Krishna received them like offerings of flowers. And the idea behind it is, how do we receive things? If somebody criticizes us, yes, the first thing is that ego rises up to be defensive. But what if they're being true? And what if by that criticism, we become a little bit humble? Even if it's not true, what if we just take it upon our head and be a little humble? There's so many responses we can have to criticism. But I think the best way is to not retaliate. The reason is because when we start to retaliate, we start to act on ego. We don't have to prove to somebody who we really are if they're being unjust. We know who we are. Why is the need to do that? So sometimes we need to choose our battles. I don't think it's essential that we have to do that. Of course, there are situations where you may be professional in a professional environment where something's been done or said that's unfair, and there you would have to, set things straight. But that's different. When we're talking about when somebody is criticizing us as a person not attached to our work or something like that, where we become accountable to, but just a criticism on a personal level. The best resource is just to not respond. It takes a lot, but not respond. Because somebody thinks that you're, I don't know, angry. If somebody thinks you're angry, doesn't mean that you're angry. Yeah, so we don't have to respond. We're not, criticism is not something that we absolutely have to respond to. We have a choice. And we should always exercise that choice. Yes, Andrea. You need to unmute.
Well, so I had seen the message. Oh my goodness, sorry, this phone. There was a post in the chat about how do you handle criticism on a personal level? Are we answering that right now or not?
Yes, we have time. We can dive into that. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a follow-up on Deepa's question, and then Rasa-sthali elucidated on that.
Okay, so the hand will go down, it's fine. So I love when I hear like, oh, how do I handle criticism? I love, this is like always my go-to of how I handle criticism, is I think of the Four Horsemen by John Gottman. So he calls like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, like towards a relationship. And so like the antidote for criticism is to state what you want and what you need. So I know that when someone is criticizing me, that they are not in a space, like a consciousness, to state what they want, to state what they need. And so then I know that they are in a space of emotional irregulation. And so then I just take a step back and just have compassion, and I listen to them, knowing it has nothing to do with me. And then later I'll follow up and say, hey, and I will try to phrase the question in a way that's helping to draw them out to state what they want or what they need in that situation, rather than use attacking you statements like, well, you said this to me. It's like, it is nothing about me at all. It's not about the dishwasher not being unloaded. It's not about being late to picking them up, or fill in the blank. It's really about that person feeling sad, hurt, fill in the blank of the emotion, because they didn't state what they wanted in that situation, and they didn't state what they needed because they were unconscious of it. So if I can help, like, just have that awareness in the moment, and then later help, after the time has passed, help, draw them out with some questions to verbalize and to think about, what did I need in that situation? What was I wanting in that situation? I think it'd be helpful. That's how I handle criticism. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Wasn't that wonderful, Rasa-sthali? I feel like that so reflected your talk, because you talked about compassion and how if we're seeing others as spirit souls and having that samadarshana, that equal view, then we can be compassionate to someone even in that moment where they're criticizing us, when they're being negative. And I love that idea of really, like you said, Rasa-sthali, we have a choice, right? We have a choice as to how we react. We can either fling that negativity right back at them and then raise that agitation level and lower ourselves to that mode of ignorance and passion, or we can be in that mode of goodness and try to raise ourselves even above that and seeing them as spirit souls who, like you said, Andrea, are hurting. And in that moment, I love that phrase, they're not conscious, right? I love that, because before we can be Krishna conscious, we have to be conscious, right? And I feel like you were kind of getting to that as well, Rasa-sthali, that you were stating, like, we have to be conscious of these unconscious and conscious biases, right? We have to be conscious before we can be Krishna conscious. So that was a really great way to connect that all together. Does anybody else have anything else that they want to share or questions?
I had a question.
Yes, Andrew.
So this concept of when we acknowledge the person is criticizing us, we just kind of, if you will, put it in a bubble and let it float away. We just let it wash over us, right? Now, if we have a child, you might correct the child, understandably, but then the child feels criticized, and they're coming from that place of defensiveness and ego-ness. And how do we can't ignore the child and then come back later and ask questions like we might with another adult in the previous example. How might we guide the child to not be so egotistical in that moment? And that's my question, yeah.
Rasa-sthali, do you want to handle that first?
I think that, as I said earlier, emotions are urgent. And it's very hard to cut through emotions when people are charged. And that's the first thing. So it's hard to diffuse when somebody's charged up. You're going to have, I think you have to wait. Like to tell an angry person, calm down. Have you ever tried that? But if you do, try it. Tell an angry person, calm down, and see the reaction.
I'm generally the one being told to be calm, so I've seen it in reverse.
Okay, and that doesn't that just work you up some more?
Generally.
Yeah, nobody wants to be told calm down. It's just like it does not help anybody. So I think with children, generally they recommend that you divert. Diversion is the best way to work with children. That is my understanding. Diversion. So because if they're charged up, they're not going to be able to go beyond it. So you divert the attention, and then maybe you can address it. You cannot address an adult when they're charged. So you're not going to be able to do it with a child. It's not different. But I think Andrea wants to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, as a teacher and someone who deals with children on a regular basis, one of the things that I've found is using a sense of humor. So, and it's going on Rasa-sthali's thing of diversion. So what you could do is, one thing is, you put your fingers up and you're like, you know what? Can you help me blow out these candles? And then they have to like blow, and then they have to engage it's like getting them into a breathing exercise almost in a different way. Or and this works for adults as well, just like, you know what, you talk about yourself. You say, I'm feeling a little angry as well. I'm feeling a little frustrated. And when I feel that way, I need to get it out by making some movement. And then you just do that. And so you're teaching by example. You're teaching by example by showing that when we're in that anger and frustration mode, to kind of get the feelings out so that we can speak calmly, we can exercise it out. We can do breathing exercises. you can say, oh, I really love listening to kirtans when I'm feeling really angry because it's really purifying and it calms me down. You're not talking about calming them down. You're talking about yourself. And then you do that. So again, it's just teaching by example. And then it follows up on what Rasa-sthali was saying, that we have that choice and we can be an example of that choice to others. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, Angel.
That second part is the blowing or like diverting to something too far away. At least for my children, it wouldn't be helpful. They'd pick up on it too quick. But something that's just that little step to the side, yeah, no, that's really helpful. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Both of you, thank you.
Oh, and does anybody else have anything?
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I heard that you can ask them something like really outrageous, like, do you want a bag of sand? So that's also very practical. It's just something out there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and you never know. You can always have a pun or a very silly joke on hand. Just keep like a bag of really silly things to say. Because I've actually seen this in when people were during the pandemic. A lot of people were very, very angry, and they were very, very frustrated. And a lot of times, what we saw were videos where people engaged people in that anger and they escalated. But what a lot of times we didn't see were the people who didn't do that. So, for example, I saw a video of a young man who was on the New York City subway, and there were two people who were very angry at each other. And his way to diffuse the situation was, and again, this is just an example, and we are in female bodies, so maybe we're different as to how we would go about this, but he put himself in between them and he started snacking on his potato chips really, really loudly, like in the silliest possible way, and he just put himself as like a barrier to their energy. And he was so calm and nonchalant and silly about snacking on those chips that it diffused the situation. The other people just couldn't handle it. And I've seen other circumstances of that where, that we can be the ones to diffuse it through silliness, through movement, through the way that we speak. And Andrea, you had your hand up. Did you want to share?
Yeah, so one thing that I've experienced with my 5 kiddos is, I mean, obviously, yes, like we don't engage an angry person so I'm kind of like nerdy when it comes to these things. And so what's happening in the brain is that amygdala is like blown up, and those, and then when we know that happens, there's nothing happening in the prefrontal cortex. They've literally just flipped their lid. There's no higher thinking going on. And so for me, like when I had the time and space, because I homeschool my 5 kids. And so when I had the time and space to say to them, wow, I can see like you're really angry. What is bothering you? Like where's anger coming from? And then I could just see them, the child would just melt, like, I'm so mad. And then they would just like pour out their heart of why they're so mad and what they're so mad about, or what they're sad about, or, why they have this like intense anger. And so I think just meeting them in their emotions, just to allow the amygdala time to just calm down and to deflate. I found that to be helpful. But again, you have to have like the time and space to do that. And if you don't, like, thank you for sharing that. I love the movement when you talked about, because like sometimes, so like we know like the zebra, like when it does the shake, like it's resetting its body. So that movement, like doing that, like just getting those out, I think is so helpful. And that's one thing I forgot that we use a lot, is like the zebra shake, because in public you can be silly and like it's okay. So yeah, but if you do have the time and space, I think as Angel asked the question, just be mindful, like, oh, am I in a space to meet this child? Am I emotionally regulated to meet this child where they're at, and to inquire of their emotions? And can I meet them where they're at with their emotions, and then draw that out of them and hold that space for them? So if you're able to do that, that's great. And I love the suggestions that when we don't have that time and space, to be able to use humor and diversion. So thank you. Hare Krishna.
Oh, thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions. I know that we had a little bit of a smaller group and folks were feeling a little shy, but I love how we opened up. And it's that radical personalist interaction that's part of bhakti, right? It's just Krishna is a person, we are people, and this is how we interact with the world. So we are going to be wrapping up, dear ladies. But before we finish, again, on behalf of the Urban Devi team, I just want to thank again Rasa-sthali Devi Dasi so much for taking the time in her busy, busy day and life to come and join us and share her realizations. Please go ahead and write in the chat your thank yous. I will gather those up and share them with her later on. But before we finish, I just want to share what our next Urban Davy will be, so you can put it on your calendar. So please mark the date for the next Urban Davy will be February 18th. And we will be having Suni Johnny MD, so a doctor. She will be coming to speak on the spirituality and the brain. And just to give you an idea of what that will be like, which I think is so interesting because we kind of led into that at the end of your talk, Rasa-sthali, and now we're going to be diving into it in February. She's going to be talking about how specific areas of the brain and certain brain chemicals play a role in experiencing spirituality. And we're going to have a small group activity where we'll learn to see like how our actions, like in terms of our spiritual practice, affect our mental state. And it's going to be really interactive. I feel like it's going to be a really great opportunity to kind of continue this conversation. So I hope that you all can join us. And I also just put in the chat that if you want to, continue with Urban Davy, if this is your first time, we have WhatsApp groups. We have an email list through Rukmini Walker, who makes this all possible. She's in India right now on a bus, so she can't speak too much, but just thanking everyone on her behalf. So if you want to be a part of that, there's her website, rukminiwalker.com. You can also partner with her on patreon.com/Rukmini Walker. So thank you again, Rasa-sthali Devi Dasi. Thank you to everyone who showed up, even with the technical difficulties. You know what? Sometimes Krishna wants to see, how bad do you want to be in the association of other devotees? How bad do you want this? So thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you for February 18th. And also, we still have spots available in the April retreat in Colombia with Rukmini Walker. So if you're interested in that, please check out rukminiwalker.com. We have more information on the events page about that. Okay, so Hare Krishna, Hare Bo. Thank you, everyone.